Okay, morning everyone. Brendan, you can hear me okay?
Yep, got you loud and clear.
Good morning everyone. Simon Cathro is my name from Cathro and Partners. This morning I have a special guest, Brendan Widdowson from Banjo Loans. He's the head of sales. We have an interesting topic today on the how to manage your business through a period of uncertainty and potential solutions. The way the presentation will be structured is that we will hand over to Brendan in the first instance to present on the SME loan survey and SME compass report and the SME business survey. And that will highlight to you some of the findings that the Banjo Loans survey found in terms of the current market. The second part of the presentation will be myself presenting on the options through managing your business with a primary focus on working capital, and then concluding with restructuring and insolvency options that might be available. If you've got some questions, there's a chat room down at the right-hand corner. Please feel free to submit your questions and we will try to answer them. The presentation will go for 1 hour approximately. We will be posting this on the website as well and circulating it to our network in the next thought leadership newsletter that we send out. So without further ado, I'll send it over to Brendan. Brendan, I'll just switch over to you now so you can put up your slides.
Perfect. Like we rehearsed that, Simon.
What's that?
It's like we rehearsed that.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much for the intro, Simon. Yeah, my name's Brendan Widdowson. I'm the head of sales at Banjo. We're delighted to be presenting to you today the latest findings from our annual SME Compass report at Banjo. I've also overlaid some of the results from the latest SME NAB SME business survey as well, which just gives us some good context around, I suppose, what the current landscape looks like for SMEs, how businesses are managing some of the big challenges that they've got at the moment with regards to recruitment and also supply chain restrictions, and then what businesses are looking to do to drive growth in 2022 and beyond, and where they're focusing at the moment to get sort of the best results. So just quickly, Banjo is an online or fintech lender. We provide working capital and asset finance solutions to businesses to help support their growth and provide a faster, more flexible alternative to the major high street banks. So getting stuck into things, the current SME landscape, moving into 2022, 55% of the business we surveyed as part of the SME Compass report said they are achieving or exceeding revenue targets, which is significantly more than last year. And in general, we're seeing that conditions are still good for businesses. We don't have the lockdowns like we did last year, and consumer demand is still holding up very well. And so looking at the latest NAB SME business service survey, you can see there on the left-hand side that the conditions and confidence both remain above long-term averages for businesses. However, you can see in the last few quarters, both are trending downwards. And then on the right-hand side by industry, conditions have rebounded strongly in hospitality. As we know, everyone's out and about at the moment, and the restaurants are full. And then most other sectors have seen small gains in conditions in the past quarter. But in contrast, confidence is starting to shift. And we've seen, most sectors have seen a decline in confidence in the past while, with the largest falls in transport, which the fluctuating price of fuel has undoubtedly been a big driver of. And confidence is also in negative territory in retail, property, and health. So what's driving that? I guess these are the big largest barriers of growth that SMEs have called out in the latest Banjo SME Compass. Unsurprisingly, economic and market conditions has been the biggest one. With the challenges we're seeing around inflation, rising interest rates, challenges with regards to supply chain restrictions and things like that. It's unsurprising that's the biggest one. Recruitment has also been a big challenge for businesses in the last 12 months. Anyone trying to recruit at the moment would completely understand that. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Customer confidence, competitor activity, access to funding, insufficient cash flow sort of round out the top six barriers that businesses have called out as a result of the survey. Further to that, over half or 55% of those surveyed are concerned that inflation will be a barrier to growth within the coming year. And to mitigate that, businesses are responding by increasing prices or reducing supply costs where they can and diversifying suppliers. So I think, yeah, probably unsurprising, inflation to be concerned, but something that businesses are having to tackle at the moment. And yeah, Simon will get into detail around again what some of the businesses are doing to manage that. I find these two charts really interesting from the NAB SME survey. You can see here that the factors constraining output for SMEs. On the left-hand side, the black line is the availability of labour, which you can see since 2020 has increased quite dramatically. Around 80% of businesses are saying that the availability is a big restraint or constraint for their business. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the availability of materials at record levels as a constraint for businesses. And interestingly, the sales and orders is actually reducing as a constraint for businesses, but it's the availability of labour and materials to be able to deliver on those orders that is the main challenge for businesses. So now we're going to look at quickly how businesses are managing the recruitment challenges that they're facing at the moment, and then get into what they're doing to manage the supply chain restrictions as well. So from our survey, 1 in 3 businesses found it difficult to recruit in the past 12 months. Hospitality and manufacturing were amongst the most impacted and said that they're finding it really difficult to manage that at the moment. And despite that, demand for new recruits remains really strong, with 60% of those surveyed saying that they're intending to hire over the next 12 months, with an average number of new recruits of 4 in the next 12 months from the SMEs that we were surveyed as a part of the SME Compass. So to overcome those challenges, businesses are using a range of tactics with regards to their hiring practices. So number one is they're offering a flexible working policy, which on the back of COVID restrictions and lockdowns, I think a lot more employees are looking for. They're also doing things like using social media for recruitment, increasing pay or providing above market salaries, looking at hiring interstate or offshore, or hiring interns, and yeah, even offering things like relocation fees or outsourcing parts of their business to overcome the real challenges that we've got at the moment with regards to talent. Then looking at supply chain restrictions, a huge 44% of those surveys said that they've been moderately or severely impacted by supply chain issues in the past year. Manufacturing and retail were the hardest hit. Obviously, yeah, bringing in supplies from offshore, raw materials for the manufacturers, and then also stock or goods for the retailers has been really difficult for them. And delayed deliveries, both locally and internationally, have been among the main challenges that businesses have had to face, as well as suppliers not being able to meet their requirements or fill orders, or even in some cases, the suppliers going out of business and not being able to support them. So there's been a range of different challenges that businesses have had to overcome with regards to supply chains. So to overcome these challenges, SMEs are purchasing more stock than they need, and they're purchasing it earlier in the cycle than they ever have before. So yeah, we've had retail clients who have been purchasing stock in the middle of the year for their busy sort of lead up to Christmas period, or even earlier than that in the cycle, whereas usually they'd have a couple of months lead time. They're having to order it sort of 6 to 8 months in advance to have it or to prepare for the busier periods that they've got coming up. Businesses are also looking at ways to diversify suppliers as well, to shore up their stock. And all of this is ultimately putting a strain on the working capital cycles of businesses, which is becoming more of a challenge, and we'll look at that in a moment. So what's driving growth for businesses in 2022 and beyond? So of those surveyed, the businesses that are expecting to grow in 2022 intend to significantly improve their existing products. They plan to invest in new technology. They plan to increase their marketing spend, plan to purchase new assets and equipment to increase productivity, or plan to launch new products to market. So for businesses that are intending to grow, it's all about diversifying products and improving market offerings, is how they're planning to sort of drive that growth and maintain the trajectory that they're on, or increase the growth into 2022 and beyond. Further to that, there's more SMEs that are pursuing acquisitions to add value to their customers. So growth through acquisition, or via acquisition, is on the cards for 47% of SME surveyed, which I find quite staggering, that almost half of all businesses are looking at opportunities out there to acquire other businesses. I guess there's a number of businesses that have been impacted by COVID, where strong performers in the industries are looking to them to acquire those businesses as a way, at a discount probably to the market rate, as a way to keep growing their business. But at the moment, it's all about adding value to customers, improving their product offerings, and increasing revenue or profitability, which is interesting. Whereas last year there was probably more businesses that were making acquisitions to increase their geographic footprint as a way of combating lockdowns, or more as a sort of a defensive strategy. Whereas this year we're seeing it's more to add value and increase their product offering and their go-to-market capability. The other thing we've seen as well is that online revenue generated by SMEs has increased significantly over the past 12 months, which is, I guess, is unsurprising, and probably a bit of a fundamental shift that we've seen for businesses, that we don't expect to change. In line with that, 61% of SMEs expect the proportion of revenue they generate online to further increase in the coming year. that's something that I guess we'll continue to see in the businesses that are you know, moving parts of their customer service, their supply chain, their technology, all those kind of things online, tend to be performing better than those that aren't. And I guess what that is doing then is putting a strain on the cash flows of businesses, as we touched on. So I think you can see here, this is the cash flow for by firm size. So low tier, mid tier, and high down the bottom there. So low tier is 2 to 3 million turnover, mid tier 3 to 5, high tier 5 to 10. And whilst you can see there in early 2020, cash flow was really strong for businesses, whilst they were supported by a lot of government stimulus and government measures through the pandemic. These measures are obviously now ceasing, and cash flow and working capital is becoming more of a concern, or is trending downwards for businesses that have been cashed up during the pandemic. But now with these the government measures coming off, it is putting, and also coupled with the challenges from an economic and market sense that we've just touched on, it's becoming more of a challenge for businesses, which Simon will touch on in a moment. In addition to that, in the next 12 months, 63% of SMEs that we surveyed intended to leverage funding to drive growth, with only 17% saying they intended to rely on their own profits or cash flow to fund their business. So there is that demand out there as cash flow tightens for businesses. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's a range of different options there out in the market for businesses that they can turn to in terms of raising capital. Yeah, as I mentioned, Simon will shortly get into some of the other options from a working capital perspective that businesses can look at in terms of and just, I suppose, sustaining their cash flow and working capital levels. So just to close things out as a bit of a summary from my end, moving into 2022, 55% of SMEs are achieving or exceeding revenue targets, which is, really strong. Conditions remain, are still really good for businesses out there. But there is a bit of a challenge coming through in terms of confidence and what's happening from a market and economic perspective. On that, over half are concerned that inflation will be a barrier to growth in the coming years, so they're looking to increase prices and potentially also diversify the suppliers. 60% of businesses still intend to hire additional staff in the next 12 months, and we know that's a challenge, and they're having to pay more than ever for new recruits and new employees. And 31% of SMEs have purchased more stock earlier than they needed to in their traditional cycle to overcome supply chain issues. And then finally, 63% of SMEs intend to leverage funding to help drive growth in the next 12 months. So thank you. My contact details are there if anyone wants to get in touch, and also feel free to ask any questions down in the chat box there. But I will hand back over to Simon now, who's going to have a look more closely at working capital cycle for businesses.
Thanks, Brendan. So what I'm going to focus on now is sort of an extension of some of the information that Brendan talked about, with a particular focus on working capital. There's a number of factors that Brendan raised through his presentation, which is extremely important to ensure that around staff shortages and supply chain issues, the focus must be there very closely. Where I think businesses that currently need to also focus on is around their working capital, and I believe when we are going through periods of uncertainty, and we have definitely seen a normalisation at a minimum of insolvency appointments in the last couple of months, with a potential for an uptick into a correction coming forward. The working capital piece in a business becomes crucial, and so really for businesses to ignore working capital, they're really doing that at their own risk. You know, we've seen a number of instances in the last couple of months where we've been appointed as insolvency practitioners over companies where, you know, the business has suffered from non-payment of a customer. The cost of materials have gone up, and then they haven't managed the creditors in that sense, and they haven't been focusing on whether you know, certain projects or certain offerings or products are actually profitable. And it's a very common thing when we do get appointed liquidator or administrator to see those kind of examples start to happen. You know, one thing that we are definitely seeing impact businesses is the cost of all types of parts to a business. And, you know, for example, energy. You know, there's an energy crisis going on in the world at the moment. Products are going up. Timber and steel have risen quite substantially in the construction industry. So all the key parts to a business and the cost to that business is going up. On top of that, with the recruitment issues that Brendan raised during his presentations, we're seeing wages go up. So it's almost, in some sense, a perfect storm of increasing costs that are coming into a business. So in putting that into perspective, I think that focus around working capital becomes very important. You know, working capital is what we call the capital of the business, which is used in its day-to-day trading operations. Basically, it's current assets minus current liabilities. The key parts to working capital are debtors, creditors, and inventory. Depending on the type of business that you have, if you're in manufacturing, inventory is a lot more important than potentially hospitality, which is a perishable goods business, and you know, the level of inventory is a lot shorter, and not possible to hold large amounts of stock. Brendan raised and made a comment earlier on about people sourcing product a lot earlier in the cycle than they have in the past because of the supply chain issues. We're seeing media and commentary out there saying that the larger operators in the construction space, for example, are getting better deals and prioritise deals over the smaller operators, and therefore that's flowing through into distress into the business. So when a business looks to focus on their working capital, it's important that they do look at each of the elements, the key elements in working capital, to make sure that, you know, that the debtors are coming in regularly. If certain debtors or customers are falling behind in their payment, you have a strong communication process to reach out to them and find out where they are at in terms of, and the reasons why they're behind in their payment. Sometimes imposing stricter rules around customers in this current environment is important. So not letting, you know, your debtor amount owed by one particular customer, be it a large customer, fall behind into 3 or 4 months, you know, up to 180 days. And once you start to get into that, you know, even if you start getting into that 90-day plus period, you start to get worried about whether those debtors are going to pay. One of the issues we are seeing quite happening in our space is that the Australian Taxation Office have now recommenced their recovery procedures in full. What is different to pre-COVID to what it is today is that we're not seeing the tax office do many winding up applications. In fact, what they're doing is using the director penalty notice to be able to recover their debt. The problem with the issue you've got where one of your customers might be subject to a director penalty notice is that the movement into insolvency becomes substantially quicker. 21 days is the period that they have to pay and deal with the direct appealing notice. And if they can't seek funding through the likes of someone like Banjo or other funders, then they have an option of putting it into an insolvency appointment. And I'll talk a bit about the insolvency options later in the presentation, both the long-term existing options and the more recent options, such as the small business restructuring process. So again, this is where it's important to stay on top of your customer base in terms of what they owe you. If you have a large customer that pays on a monthly basis or within 14 days and they start to stretch that out to 90 days, that could be quite a large exposure that you suffer from if in that period of time that customer gets issued a direct appealing notice and decides to go down the path of insolvency. So again, monitoring those debtors. With the inventory, we come back to Brendan's earlier comments around the supply chain issues and sourcing that stock. If the stock needs to be sourced earlier, what impact does it have on the cash flow? What kind of cash do you have available? The 63%, I think that was mentioned in Brendan's presentation around SMEs using funding to leverage growth. This is where options and funding options like the ones that Banjo offers and others offer become quite important, because where you do have a situation where you have to source your inventory a lot earlier in the cycle because of the current market conditions, then the funding option becomes a lot more real and likely. Just with the working capital cycles, that's what that is the time taken by an organisation to convert its net current assets and current liabilities into cash. And it reflects the ability and efficiency of the organisation to manage its short-term liquidity position. Now, for a business, the efficiency and the effectiveness of managed working capital, it could not be any more important than it has today than in recent times. So again, coming back to some of my earlier comments around, collecting your debtors quickly accessing, getting the inventory in earlier and using funding to access that earlier is better. On the creditor side, if you are able to negotiate longer terms, then seek them out. But again, if your suppliers are managing their working capital in a similar way to you, the payment of those creditor amounts may still need to be in a much shorter payment period because of the motivation of those suppliers and creditors to want to get paid quicker. So in terms, and coming back to why working capital is important, it gives you greater insight on what the funding is required for your day-to-day trading operations. If you've got a very effective way of managing your working capital and you can get some visibility, and let's go back to Brendan's example around the supplier and the sourcing of supply, 2 or 3 months earlier for, say, a retail business to get prepared for the Christmas trade. Now, if you have got strong management of the working capital, you will know that potentially there could be a cash crunch that happens 2 or 3 months earlier because of the fact that you need to sort of source that supply in order to have the supply ready for your peak sale period come November, December, January. So how do you source that? You reach out and you seek funding. And again, coming back to that 63% of SMEs wanting to seek funding, it's important to understand how much funding you need. The only way you can, the primary way that you have in terms of understanding what your funding needs are is that you have to understand what your working capital position is. And so how much do you know is going to come in through your debtors and get converted into cash over the next 2-month period? If you're sourcing that stock as a retailer in August, July and August rather than potentially September, October, then that could be, you may be short of cash. So knowing how much to borrow allows you to go off and seek funding to be able to source that working capital amounts. Work out which amounts can be realised and paid in the short term, and work out and calculate how much you need and what your ability is to cover the costs. And finally, what impact does this have on your going concern and liquidity issues? Now, why this is important is that if you are as a business underperforming, not because potentially revenue has dropped, but because of the cost of supply of product, cost of wages, your catch off and potential old debts as a result of the COVID lockdown is greater than what the actual revenue that you can generate. And you can absolutely see revenue grow in businesses year on year, but the actual growth in costs and cost of doing business is accelerating quicker than the growth in revenue. And so that's where it's important to have, where the working capital will help you give that visibility and gain that visibility for you to determine, well, is this worth continuing under the current situation? And that sort of leads us into a conversation later in this presentation around what are your options when you're faced with the dilemma that, yes, my revenue growth is going really well, or maybe it is coming off, but my cost is accelerated a lot quicker than my revenue, and so I need to restructure or look at insolvency options. So talking about what are the initiatives that is available under working capital. Now, before we get into the restructuring options, here are some debt options: your business credit card, equipment finance, export finance, floor plan finance, import finance, invoice financing, merchant cash advance, bank overdraft, peer-to-peer lending, bank loan, trade finance, and online small business finance, fintech loan. So even under your debt options, there are a number of options available depending on what type of business you're in. Moving into the equity space, we've got angel investing, crowdfunding, private equity, and venture capital. So there are more options today than ever before. Look at your business, look at the type of business that you're operating. I mean, you wouldn't, for instance, import finance wouldn't make sense for a hospitality business or a cafe. Floor plan finance, possibly, okay, but you would look at potentially an online small business loan for a cafe. If you move into a business like manufacturing, then some of these other types of finance, like import finance and export finance and floor plan finance, become more realistic and a much better option for them. Around the equity options, it's been quite popular in certain sectors like technology where they have been raising a lot of capital. Look at the capital options and look at the types of venture capitalists that are out there. There are many venture capitalists that focus on particular areas, ranging from, like I said, the technology space into distress space into manufacturing space. So you need to speak to your advisors, reach out to your advisors, and find out what venture capital or private equity options may be available. The key to getting into and using and working with the private equity and venture capital space is that they're going in there for a venture, for investment, and they often have a timeline as to how long they propose and prepare to remain in the business. So they normally have an exit plan, which they should disclose to you, or you should discuss with them prior to entering into any sale or equity sale with them. At that time, so make sure you understand what their motivation is, and then determine whether the equity options, those two equity options, are the type of options that you want that would be right for your business. So moving on to the insolvency, restructuring and turnaround in insolvency options. So let's start with the insolvency options first. So under that's what I call the traditional or the older types of options. You have the voluntary administration, you have the deed of company arrangement, you have the liquidator option, receivership option, and then you've got the informal one, which I'll talk about in a separate slide. Now, under the voluntary administration option, this is used when an individual when a company is looking to continue to trade or to provide a return that's better to creditors than a liquidation. Most of the voluntary administrations I do will end up in some form of deed to company arrangement. The reason why those directors have chosen that option is that they wanted to continue to trade, or they want to make sure that they get a better return back to creditors on a wind down or an exit from the business. The process takes 4 to 6 weeks, unless it's extended by the court or creditors. Our role is to realise assets potentially. What we mean by realise assets, that could be a sale of business. It could be just a straight auction of assets. And so the realising of assets incorporates a number of potential options there. We're also obligated to investigate claims. So we do look into the fact that the actual company is insolvent. Companies can't go into administration unless it's insolvent or about to become insolvent. And then we report and communicate to creditors through 2 meetings of creditors, at least 2 meetings of creditors, and reports to creditors. And in those reports and in those meetings, we talk about the company's future. The primary thing that tends to happen in a voluntary administration is that the creditors are interested as to what they're going to get back. Are they going to get a return? Is the business going to continue to trade? Will they get future supply from future orders from the business that's in administration? And then most importantly, do they want to continue working with that company as a result of the losses they've made prior to the company going into administration? Now, if the company is in administration, they head towards what's called a deed to company arrangement, or a DOCA, as the screen shows. This is the whole purpose of the deed, is to continue the company in existence and to give that company a fresh start. Now, it couldn't be more relevant today than it has been in my whole career, in the sense that we've seen 2 years of a very unusual event, the COVID lockdown. We have seen many businesses rack up debts, primarily tax debts, that are now having and required to be paid back. And the DOCA option, along with the small business restructuring option, which I'll talk about shortly, gives these businesses an option to say, hey, creditors, would you like to have your debts compromised, rather than having the company go into liquidation and wind down. So the deed to company arrangement is there. It's utilised primarily and usually in the sense that the company can't pay its creditors out in full. The role of us, which we call ourselves the deed administrator, is to make sure that the terms of the deed to company arrangement are met, and that there's ultimately a distribution to creditors. What those terms in a DOCA look like is really up for grabs. It can be as flexible and as broad as you like, and as long as it has a better return than a liquidation scenario, then generally speaking, the DOCA can be very flexible in all other parts of the offer. With the liquidation option, that is where the business has determined that it no longer wants to continue to trade. I've seen many instances in just this calendar year where people have come to us and say, Simon, look, I'm just over this. There's too many variables now. You saw some of the commentary that Brendan talked around what the businesses are looking at. Making acquisitions to improve the offering to the customer base. We've seen a change in the customer base and their behaviour. Online's a lot greater. So what happens if a business doesn't have an online capability, yet their industry has seen a growth to 34%, as Brendan mentioned, and essentially they're seeing an impact to their revenue because they're not ready to get themselves set up, or are unable to get themselves set up properly because of the fact that they don't have the available cash, nor is the business in a financial position to be able to do that. So again, the choice is that they decide to leave and exit the industry or the company, and essentially the role they approach us to act in a sense to act as liquidator. Now, our role is to report to creditors and to investigate and report on what is called to the regulator. the reason for the insolvency, and then of course our role is to realise the assets and hopefully realise sufficient assets to provide a distribution to creditors. The fourth option, which is around the receivership, that option primarily is to protect the secure creditor, and really the role of our role as receiver is to act for that secure creditor and any priority creditors that sit above them, such as employees, and certainly in the circulating or the floating charge assets like debtors. You know, in a property receivership, it's a fairly uncomplex process. It's the asset gets put to market, an agent or commercial agent gets appointed. They test the market through a recommended mechanism, whether it's an auction, an expression of interest, or a sale process, and then someone comes in with the highest bid. But primarily the receivership focuses on one stakeholder, being the secure creditor, or if there's a syndication of secure creditors, a group of secure creditors in that sense. So very different, the receivership, as to where the motivation of our role is. It's not really an ideal option for a business owner, unless the business owner is also the secure creditor. And generally speaking, if a business owner is looking to restructure their business, the voluntary administration option is usually the more popular version. Now, just following on from that, there was a couple of new options that were introduced by the previous federal government, and they have had a very slow take-up. It's fair to say we are starting to see a pickup in recent months around the small business restructuring process. The eligibility under these two options is the companies need to owe less than $1 million in total to creditors, which includes secured debts and related party debts. It's not that much, and so in that sense, it's not that difficult to get over $1 million. If you've got $100,000 of employee entitlements, you've got outstanding tax of $200,000 or $300,000, you've got related party debts, and you've got secured debt there, you can easily see a small business get over that $1 million mark quite quickly. So hopefully, and they raise that limit, and then it gives a much greater proportion of businesses to access these type of appointments. Under the simplified liquidation, just quickly there, that is almost very similar to the standard liquidation process I spoke about earlier. It does just reduce some of the actual reporting obligations and does reduce some of the recovery options that are available to a liquidator, and it does modify certain reporting obligations to ASIC. But in essence, to the company and the directors, the process looks rather identical to the standard creditors voluntary liquidation process. Under the small business restructure, which is the more important one, the key difference between this option and a voluntary administration option is that the trading during a voluntary administration must be controlled and managed by the administrator. Under this option, that option doesn't occur, and so it can actually reduce the cost quite significantly in that sense. What happens here is you appoint a restructuring practitioner, which is a registered liquidator. You trade on as normal, but in your control. And while that trading on is happening, the directors and the restructuring practitioner is developing a restructure plan, which is similar in nature to the deed in essence, in the sense that basically we are compromising what the debt position is. And let's just say you have $100 of debt owing, the compromise or the restructure plan comes in and says, look, I might offer 15, 20 cents in the dollar. Creditors, again, just like the deed of company arrangement under the voluntary administration option, is it gets voted on by creditors. And that's what's very key here. Under these kind of formal appointments, the creditors get a very large say and a lot of control as to whether they want to move forward under the various restructures that might be offered through a deed of company arrangement or a small business restructure plan. Okay, so moving on to the next one is around the informal restructuring options. Now, we saw the introduction in 2017 of the safe harbour process. We are starting to see a real pickup in the safe harbour process, a lot more comfort, it's fair to say, in advisors, directors and the actual insolvency practitioners themselves running these processes and getting success out of it. You know, what happens in essence under a safe harbour is that you don't appoint a formal, or you don't have a formal appointment through the appointment of a restructuring practitioner. You work with a restructuring practitioner or someone with similar skill sets to basically look at what kind of steps can be done to achieve essentially what you would call a better outcome. You know, the process is a lot longer. The process is private. It doesn't need to be publicly disclosed. There are some covenants now under funding agreements that requires a disclosure with the financier. But your main aim here is to avoid a formal appointment. The big difference between an informal option and let's say the formal options is that the formal options are public, and people get to, and there's a lot of disclosure, there's a lot of communication between the restructuring practitioner and the debtors, for example, and the customers and the creditors. And of course, those kind of conversations can be somewhat damaging in terms of a breakdown in trust. People have lost money, they don't trust you as much anymore, they don't trust your business acumen, and so there has to be a conversation done to rebuild that trust. Under the safe harbour option, whilst the business may similarly be in a financial difficult spot, it doesn't have to be public, and there's often restructuring steps like, you know, a reduction in headcount, you know, maybe an acquisition. Sometimes we've seen acquisitions through a safe harbour to improve the process. Certainly we've seen a sale of assets and divisions sold off to achieve a restructure, try and, you know, fix the working capital, improve the bottom line profitability. Restructuring is a very similar process. The key difference between the two, the restructuring and the safe harbour, is that under the Corporations Act, the safe harbour is seen as a defence to insolvent trading. Now, the main thing to keep in mind with safe harbour is that there are eligibility requirements. So, for instance, you've got to have all your tax lodgements up to date. You've got to have all your employee entitlements paid up to date, and then you need to have proper books and records. Under the restructuring options, there's no legislative eligibility required. It's trying to do the same, but it's not giving or providing the directors this absolute comfort around a defence to insolvent trading. So it's important really to make sure that when you are looking at the option of safe harbour, if you don't qualify, it doesn't mean that all options, certainly informal options, are lost. Moving towards the restructuring and then even further the turnaround option is certainly one to look at. I've added the refinancing option in there because you know, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are so many different types of finance facilities. Now, Banjo's obviously got their finance facilities, but refinancing and restructuring can go hand in hand. And I think where we are currently, where we are seeing all these different challenges from recruitment to supply chain issues to the acceleration of the ATO debt recovery process through the use of the director penalty notice, accessing refinancing along at the same time as potentially restructuring or doing a safe harbour is becoming more common. Some of the safe harbour options that assignments that I've done in the last 6 months is certainly seen that option of refinancing become a reality. And finally, just around the capital raise, again, you can raise you can look to do a capital raise to try and turn around the business. Now, what we're seeing at the moment is a lot more caution in the market, higher expectation from investors from a greater return as the interest rates go up, and so we may start to see a slowdown in that capital raise at levels that otherwise supported what Brendan spoke about with the high level of acquisitions. What will be interesting to see is whether the continued high level of acquisitions that Brendan spoke about will happen as interest rates start to go up. And if we do see 2, 3, maybe 4 more interest rate rises this year, it will be interesting to see if people start sort of pulling back on that expansion plans and focusing on just, maintaining the status quo and making sure the working capital is being managed properly. And that really brings us to the end of our presentation. I think some of the key points to take is look at the actual presentation, that the survey that Brendan and Banjo Loans have taken. I think it's fair to say that the recruitment space and the staff shortages has been a real problem for most people. We're seeing economic commentators say that the unemployment rate could go very well below 3%. The director penalty notice is absolutely underway with the ATO, and certainly the supply chain issues and the cost of goods are starting. We're starting to hear comments of people not coming back to building sites because the cost to do what's left in the project is just too much. We're seeing people exiting the market as a result of fatigue, the COVID impact, cost of goods, and people just leaving industries in full. What I have noticed is that the appointments that we've done in the last couple of months, where unfortunately we've had to make people redundant, those people have actually picked up jobs very quickly, and when I mean very quickly, within a week. And so we're seeing people finding jobs after an insolvency event very quickly. So that just sort of says that the recruitment issue is a very strong challenge for business in this current environment. And that concludes our presentation. Brendan, I don't think there was any questions, were there?
I've got a question without notice for you, Simon. Obviously, yeah, you presented a lot of different options here for businesses, from going and seeking different debt solutions to all the way through to administration, liquidation, those kind of things. When a business comes to you, what are the key things that you're looking for to assess what is the right path for a business from a lot of the options that you've presented,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for what we're seeing is what's caused the current concern amongst the directors around the performance of the business, and that can vary very differently. We had an electricity retailer. They were trading profitably. They were heading straight into a headwind of a substantial increase in the contract, heads contract that they were about to sign under from the 1st of July. In a construction business, it was supply chain. We've had hospitality where they just can't get enough staff, and therefore the quality of the actual service starts to fall off. So when we're looking at what are the key drivers of their financial distress, the question then is, can it be fixed? Now, a lot of the insolvency appointments that we're taking in recent time is through direct penalty notices. And so this small business restructuring option, the voluntary administration option, becomes a real possibility, because if it's just to deal with debts that have accrued in the past, and the business can operate, as you call it, I think we said earlier in the docket, it's a clean start, right? So if you can continue to go forward in that sense, by providing a solution to deal with the old debt, then businesses can move forward. Now, you can deal with the old debt through a refinance or through an accessing of funding as well, so that may avoid the insolvency altogether. And I think it's very important that people realise that the insolvency appointment has brand damage, and so because it's so public, and it breaches trust and it destroys trust. Trying to rebuild that trust is always challenging, and so going down the path of voluntary administration has some brand damage. It's very rare in the appointments I take that damage is avoided. I actually got one at the moment where the actual directors passed away, so the solution was to put it into liquidation. So we haven't seen as much brand damage in that process than I've seen in the past. So again, you look at the working capital is very important. You look straight at the aged debtors, aged creditors, the aging of the inventory, see how much the problem is, or in that sense, through either the fact that it's dropped, or the cost has gone up, or the aging is blown out. So every business has its own unique challenges.
Yeah, no, thank you. That makes sense.
Well, thank you, everyone. We did this with 5 minutes to spare, or 4 minutes to spare. It's now 10:56, and Thank you for attending, and it will be posted on the website, and we'll have further communications with respect to the presentation. If you do want to reach out to Brendan as well, please do so. You know, that is a real option for for those that are accountants and lawyers on the call. It's a real option for your clients to consider. Banjo's been around for a number of years now, and have been providing a very good product. But Brendan, thank you for joining us, and look forward to the next webinar.
Yeah, thanks very much, Simon. Thanks to everyone who's attended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.